The sun had been blazing over the desert world of Calith for hours, painting the endless dunes with shades of orange and gold. The wind carried a dry, hot bite, lifting sand in small, stinging swirls. Kieran, a human explorer, trudged steadily through the heat, his boots sinking slightly with each step into the fine, loose sand. The water in his canteen was running low, and each sip felt heavier than the last. Yet he did not panic. Panic never helped anyone survive in places like this. Careful thought, observation, and a calm mind were the tools of a survivor. Kieran had been on Calith for over a month. His mission was simple but dangerous: to map the desert regions, locate sources of water, and gather data on native life. Most explorers avoided the vast stretches of desert, preferring safer valleys or rivers, but Kieran had always been drawn to the challenge. He liked the solitude, the silence, and the chance to prove that a human mind could adapt to any situation. As he moved forward, he spotted movement on the horizon. A shimmer of motion caught his eye, too precise to be a mirage. Squinting, he saw figures approaching, tall, broad, and unmistakably alien. Their skin glimmered like rough metal under the sun, and their limbs were long and powerful. They moved with grace and confidence, carrying long, curved spears and wearing minimal armor designed for mobility. Kieran stopped, instinctively dropping to one knee behind a small dune. He studied them carefully. They were Verath, the nomadic warrior clan that dominated the desert regions. Stories of them traveled faster than sandstorms, fierce hunters, proud and unyielding and completely untrusting of outsiders. Encounters with humans were rare and usually ended badly for one side. Yet Kieran did not feel fear. Instead, he felt curiosity. The Verath seemed to sense him as well. One of them, a young female warrior, moved closer than the others. She paused and studied the human with sharp, calculating eyes. Her name, he would later learn, was Lyra. Unlike her companions, she seemed cautious rather than aggressive, as if intrigued by this lone human who dared wander their territory. Kieran decided to make his move. Slowly, he rose to his feet and raised a hand, showing that he carried no weapon. From his pack, he pulled out his water canteen and held it forward. "Water," he said simply. "Take it if you're thirsty." She did not yet trust him, but something in his calm stance and steady gaze made her pause. Kieran did not flinch under her scrutiny. He did not lower the canteen. "I have more than enough for myself," he added, voice steady. "If you need it, take it, no tricks." Offering water freely was not weakness. It was confidence or perhaps madness. She hesitated. Her instincts screamed to take it anyway, to test the human, to assert dominance. Yet there was a spark of curiosity she could not ignore. The other Verath warriors watched silently from the dunes behind her, their eyes like polished stones. None of them moved. They had never seen a human behave this way, without fear, without flattery, without desperation. Lyra took a small step forward, then stopped. She did not reach for the water. Instead, she studied him, her chest rising and falling in slow, controlled breaths. Kieran lowered the canteen slightly, as if acknowledging her caution. "Suit yourself," he said, almost casually. The words carried no threat, no frustration, just a quiet confidence that humans sometimes possessed when they knew their limits and abilities. For a long moment, the desert wind seemed to pause around them. Sand swirled gently, and the sun beat down relentlessly. Kieran could feel Lyra's gaze, sharp and curious, tracing every movement he made. She expected fear, hesitation, or a request for mercy. None came. Instead, the human simply stood there, calm and deliberate. Then, as if to prove a point, Kieran took a sip of water from his own canteen. Not greedily, not hurriedly, but in a measured way that showed he was comfortable, in control, and capable. Lyra's eyes widened ever so slightly. This was not the reaction of a desperate human. This was the reaction of someone confident in his survival skills, someone who had learned to thrive in hostile environments rather than merely endure them. After a moment, Lyra stepped back and raised her hand, signaling to her clan. The other Verath remained still, but a ripple of tension passed through them. They were hunters, warriors, and survivalists. They could read strength in small gestures, the way a human drank water, the way he moved, the way he faced them without flinching. And in Kieran they saw something rare, intelligence combined with courage. Kieran watched them carefully. He knew that any sudden movements could trigger aggression, but he also knew that patience and observation were his allies. He had survived deserts, storms, and predators that could tear flesh in an instant. The Verath were formidable, but he had learned to think faster, adapt quicker, and remain calm under pressure. Lyra took another step forward, this time closer to Kieran. Her expression was unreadable, but her body language suggested curiosity. She studied his face, his hands, the way he adjusted his pack. She was learning silently how this human survived. Humans were unpredictable, and unpredictability could be dangerous or impressive. Kieran sensed her hesitation and made no move to exploit it. Instead, he spoke again, voice calm. "The desert is hard on everyone. Water is precious. I've learned to share when I can, and to take only what I need." The sun continued its march across the sky, and Kieran knew that the heat would test them all. But he did not fear the sun, the sand, or the Verath. He had survived harsher conditions and deadlier creatures. What mattered was not brute strength, but thought, adaptability, and the ability to remain calm when others expected panic. Hours passed. Kieran did not leave, and Lyra did not take the water. Instead, they existed in a tense but silent understanding. The human had offered, the alien had tested, and both had measured the other. Kieran's mind worked constantly, analyzing the Verath movements, their posture, the subtle ways they communicated without words. He noted every detail, every pattern, knowing that in survival, knowledge could be more powerful than weapons. When the sun began its descent, painting the dunes in a deep orange glow, Lyra finally spoke. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "You are not like the others," she said. "You do not fear us, you do not trick us, you are unusual. I have learned to survive by understanding, not by dominating. Strength is more than just power. Sometimes it's patience, observation, and knowing when to act." Kieran offered a small smile, acknowledging her interest without threatening it. For the first time, Lyra allowed herself to be impressed, not by weapons or speed, but by intellect, courage, and the quiet confidence of a human who had learned to survive in a world that seemed designed to destroy him. The sun dipped below the horizon and the desert cooled slightly, but the tension between human and alien did not fade. It had transformed into something different, mutual recognition. The human was capable, the alien was intrigued, and both knew that the encounter was only the beginning. Kieran finally lowered his canteen completely, standing tall against the fading light. "I will not take from your herd," he said, voice steady. "But I will survive. That is all any of us can do." The desert stretched endlessly before them, and both understood that this was more than a meeting. It was a test, a lesson, and a challenge, and Kieran, as always, was ready. The wind carried the first hints of night across the dunes, and Kieran prepared to continue his journey. The Verath would watch and perhaps learn, but he did not worry. He had water, knowledge, and the skill to survive. And in a world that demanded strength, he carried something just as powerful, the human mind. As night fell, the stars appeared above the desert, cold and distant. Kieran took one last sip from his canteen, savoring the cool water. Lyra observed him silently, realizing that this human was unlike any creature she had ever encountered. He had offered water, he had respected the herd, and yet he had survived without fear, without trickery, and without compromise. For the first time, Lyra wondered if humans were not merely prey or outsiders, but something more. Something dangerous, clever, and admirable, and she could not wait to see what he would do next. The desert was colder than Kieran expected as the sun sank further behind the dunes. The warmth that had baked the sand all day faded quickly, replaced by a chill that crept under his thin jacket. The air was still but not peaceful, every sound carried far across the empty landscape. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the low rumble of a herd moving, their massive bodies stirring the sands. He paused and listened, letting his eyes adjust to the dimming light. The Verath were nearby. Kieran knew it before he saw them. There was a subtle change in the sand, the way the air felt, the way the shadows moved. Lyra stepped out from behind a ridge, her form calm and deliberate. She carried herself like a predator, alert but not aggressive. Behind her, a few other warriors trailed silently, their eyes never leaving him. "You survive well," Lyra said, her voice quiet but clear. "But surviving is not enough. This desert, it will not forgive mistakes. If you want to live tonight, follow me." After a while, they reached a narrow canyon. Inside, the air was cooler, the wind blocked by high walls of rock. At the canyon's center, a small pool of water shimmered under the last rays of sunlight. Kieran's eyes widened slightly. Water in this desert was rare, and any source could quickly become dangerous. Yet this pool was untouched, pristine, and surrounded by signs of life, the tracks of desert creatures and the faint marks of the Verath herd. "This is the herd's water," Lyra said, glancing at him. "It belongs to the clan. You do not drink unless permitted." He could feel the water calling, a lifeline in the harsh desert, but he also understood the importance of trust. One wrong move could endanger him. Lyra stepped closer to the water and crouched, letting her fingers skim its surface. The reflection of the sky rippled across the pool. She did not move to drink. Instead, she watched him, eyes sharp and calculating. Kieran studied her in return. She was strong, disciplined, and aware of every movement. Her clan had trained her well, but there was something more. An openness to learning, to observing, a curiosity that not all warriors possessed. He knew that to survive here, he would need to rely on both caution and ingenuity. The desert stretched endlessly around them, and Kieran realized how small he appeared against the vast landscape. Yet he did not feel powerless. He had survived harsher deserts, harsher conditions, and worse predators. What mattered was his mind, the ability to analyze, adapt, and act decisively. Lyra broke the silence. "Why are you here, human? This desert is not forgiving to outsiders. Most would perish in days." "And I test myself, that is all." Massive, four-legged creatures with thick hides and long curved horns moved slowly across the sand, their hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. The herd was enormous, and their size alone was intimidating. Kieran had never seen anything like it. "They provide water for the clan," Lyra said. "They are strong, but they obey only those who respect strength and intelligence. Drink without permission, and you will pay." The temperature dropped further, and Kieran could see his breath in the air. Lyra moved close to him again, this time more relaxed, though still vigilant. "You are clever," she said quietly. "I can see it in the way you watch, the way you think. Few humans survive more than a week here. Fewer survive without fear. Fear can make one slow, careless, and weak. I have learned that the hard way." But he remembered her words, the rules of the herd, and the unspoken trust between them. Acting recklessly here would cost him dearly. He waited. Lyra watched him silently. Then slowly she crouched near the water, scooping a small amount into her hands and drinking. She looked at him as she did so, a challenge in her gaze. It was a silent test. Would he break, or would he wait, observing and calculating as he always did? Kieran's lips curved into a small, almost amused smile. He did not move to drink. Instead, he lowered his canteen slightly, signaling respect. Then deliberately, he knelt near the edge of the pool and dipped his hands into the water, letting it trickle slowly into his mouth. Not greedily, not in haste, but in careful, measured sips. Lyra blinked. She had expected him to hesitate, to panic, or to act recklessly. Instead, he drank with precision, with awareness, and with calm confidence. It was not the act of a weak human. It was the act of one who knew exactly what he was doing and why. For the first time, Lyra felt a flicker of respect for the human. The Verath measured strength in many ways, physical power, speed, skill with weapons. But intelligence and composure were equally important. Kieran had shown both in the way he approached the herd, the water, and her. The other Verath watched from the shadows, silent and alert. They had never seen a human act like this. Most would have grabbed the water and risked the herd's anger. Most would have panicked under their scrutiny. Kieran did neither. He acted with the calm precision of a predator and the thoughtfulness of a scholar. Hours passed, and the chill deepened. Kieran stood and stretched lightly, testing his muscles and joints. He felt the desert around him, the subtle changes in wind, the faint movements of distant creatures, the way the sand shifted underfoot. He could survive here because he observed constantly, acted carefully, and respected the rules of the land. Lyra stepped closer, her curiosity growing. "You are different," she said softly. "You do not behave like other humans. You are clever, brave, and patient. Most would have failed long ago. The desert tests everyone, but it rewards those who respect it and themselves." It had shifted into something else, a subtle understanding, a silent acknowledgement of strength, skill, and intelligence. Lyra would not admit it yet, but she was impressed. Kieran had survived not through force, not through speed, but through mind, courage, and awareness. The stars reflected off the still water, and Kieran finally lowered his hands. He did not drink more than he needed. He did not act recklessly. He simply existed, calm and deliberate, observing and respecting the world around him. Lyra watched him silently, realizing that this human was unlike any she had ever encountered. He had survived the desert, faced the herd, and navigated the unspoken rules without fear or arrogance. He had proven himself in a way that words could not convey, through action, through intelligence, and through patience. For the first time, Lyra wondered if humans were more than outsiders or prey. Perhaps they were something else entirely, something clever, resourceful, and resilient, something worth watching. And as Kieran settled for the night, preparing to continue his journey at first light, the young Verath warrior stayed close, silently observing, curious and cautious. She did not yet trust him fully, but she respected him. And respect in the desert was the first step toward survival. The next morning, the desert was quiet, but not empty. Kieran had already begun moving before the sun fully rose, his steps precise and steady. The air carried a crispness that hinted at the heat to come, and every grain of sand seemed to shift beneath his boots, as if alive. Lyra followed at a distance, keeping out of sight but observing everything he did. She wanted to understand how this human survived where most would fail in hours. Kieran scanned the horizon carefully. Small changes in the dunes, slight shifts in the wind, and the distant movements of animals all told him where water might be found and where danger might lurk. The Verath had taught him something without words, the importance of observation, patience, and respect. He moved as a shadow, silent and deliberate, keeping his eyes on both the landscape and the alien warrior who followed. Hours passed, and Kieran spotted movement near a rocky outcrop. A group of small, desert-dwelling creatures scuttled across the sand, their quick, spindly legs barely making tracks. To anyone else, they would have been insignificant, but Kieran studied them closely. He noted their behavior, how they avoided predators, and where they gathered. From these small observations, he could find hidden water sources, safe paths, and the best places to rest. Humans had survived for centuries because of skills like this, intelligence and awareness. Lyra watched him with silent fascination. She had never seen a human pay such careful attention to details that others would overlook. Most humans moved blindly, relying on weapons or luck. Kieran relied on his mind. She began to understand why Lyra's elders often said that humans were unpredictable, dangerous, and worth observing. As the sun rose higher, the heat became unbearable. Kieran sought shade in a narrow crevice between two rocks. The stone was warm from the morning sun but offered protection from the wind. He took a small sip of water, careful to ration it, and allowed himself a moment to rest. He could hear the faint sound of the Verath heard in the distance, their hooves like drums across the sand. Lyra approached cautiously, keeping to the shadows. She crouched on a nearby ridge, her eyes never leaving him. Her clan had warned her about humans. They were clever, opportunistic, and fearless when they needed to be. Kieran was clever, yes, but his fearlessness was different. It was quiet, deliberate, and almost unnerving. He did not rush, panic, or hesitate. He simply acted, and the desert responded to his careful observation. "You are still here," Kieran said, his voice calm, carrying easily across the distance. "I assumed you would return to your clan. It is about thinking ahead, understanding your environment, and knowing when to act." He set small traps to catch desert rodents for food, creating simple snares from wire and scraps of fabric. He used the sun and shadows to mark his path and avoid getting lost. He found edible plants growing near the rocks, hidden in shadows where most creatures could not reach. Every action was precise, efficient, and necessary for survival. Lyra observed silently. She had trained her whole life to survive in the desert, to hunt, and to lead her herd. Yet she had never seen a human act with such calculated skill. Most humans relied on weapons, tools, or luck. Kieran relied on knowledge, observation, and ingenuity. By midday, the sun was at its peak, and the desert seemed almost alive with heat. Kieran moved carefully toward a narrow canyon he had spotted the previous evening. He knew that water might be hidden there, trapped in small pools or underground reservoirs. Lyra followed, keeping hidden behind a ridge, curious but cautious. Kieran paused at the canyon entrance. He examined the rocks, the sand, and the faint marks of animal movement. He had learned to read the desert like a map, understanding where life thrived and where danger lay. He knelt and traced small lines in the sand, marking paths and potential hazards. Lyra watched, fascinated. She realized that this human's mind was unlike any she had encountered. He did not rely solely on strength or instinct. He planned, observed, and adapted constantly. This was what made humans so unpredictable and dangerous in the eyes of the Verath. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the sand near the canyon. Kieran froze, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the threat. A group of desert predators, sleek and fast, approached. Their eyes glowed with hunger and their claws dug into the sand as they moved silently. Most humans would panic, but Kieran remained calm. He observed the creatures, noting their patterns and likely paths. He did not reach for a weapon. Instead, he moved deliberately, guiding the predators away from the water pool using subtle movements, throwing small stones to redirect them, and using shadows and terrain to his advantage. The predators hesitated, confused by his understanding of their behavior. Within moments, they gave up and retreated into the dunes, leaving the pool undisturbed. Lyra could not hide her amazement. She had expected fear, desperation, or clumsy action. Instead, the human had used his mind to control the situation, protecting both himself and the water without risking direct confrontation. "You are clever," she admitted softly. "Most humans would not think like that. They would fight or run, not outsmart." He built small barriers to prevent the herd from wandering into dangerous areas, observing their movements and predicting their behavior. He even found a small underground spring, using basic methods to extract water without alerting the herd to his presence. Lyra followed at a distance, her respect growing. The elders had spoken the truth. Humans were unpredictable. But she had not realized just how formidable they could be. Kieran survived not by brute force or weapons, but by thinking ahead, adapting constantly, and respecting both the desert and the creatures within it. By evening, Kieran had set up a small resting area near the pool. He allowed the herd to drink freely, observing their behavior and ensuring they were safe. Lyra approached, her movements cautious but curious. "You do not fear them," she said, indicating the herd. "They could easily trample you, injure you, or worse. I do not need to dominate them to survive." That night, as the desert cooled and stars filled the sky, Kieran and Lyra sat near the water pool, silent but aware of each other's presence. The herd rested nearby, and the desert seemed to settle around them. Kieran took a careful sip of water, ensuring he had enough to continue the journey tomorrow. Lyra watched silently, her mind filled with questions, curiosity, and respect. "You are not like the others," she finally said. "You do not act out of fear, desperation, or arrogance. You survive because you understand that is unusual." She had seen strength in many forms, physical, strategic, and leadership, but this was different. This human survived not by dominating, not by fighting, not by luck, but by intelligence, calmness, and the ability to adapt. For the first time, she considered that humans might not just be outsiders or prey. They could be equals, or even formidable allies, in ways the Verath had not yet imagined. As the night deepened, Lyra remained silent, watching. She did not trust him fully yet, but respect had taken root. And in the desert, respect was the first step toward recognition, and recognition could mean survival. Kieran, meanwhile, prepared for the next day. The desert offered challenges at every turn, but he had the skills, the mind, and the calm determination to face them. He was not just surviving. He was mastering the desert, observing, adapting, and thriving. The stars glimmered above, casting faint light over the dunes. The desert was vast, harsh, and unforgiving, yet Kieran had proven that humans could endure. And as Lyra observed silently, she began to understand that this was only the beginning. This human, alone and unarmed, had survived challenges that would have defeated most, and he did so with patience, observation, and intelligence. For the first time, she wondered if humans were more than clever creatures. They were something extraordinary, something capable of surviving, adapting, and thriving where others failed. And Kieran, ever calm, ever aware, continued to watch, learn, and endure. The desert was vast, but so was the human mind. The morning sun rose slowly over the dunes, casting long shadows across the desert. Kieran was already awake, moving with deliberate care. He had learned to rise before the heat, to take advantage of the cooler hours, and to study the environment before the world fully woke. Lyra had been watching him from a distance, curious and cautious, but she did not approach yet. She wanted to see if his calm yesterday would hold under new challenges. The desert seemed quiet, almost serene, but Kieran knew better. He had survived storms, predators, and hidden hazards. Quiet in the desert often meant danger was gathering, and today danger was near. As he moved toward a rocky canyon he had marked the day before, the wind began to shift. The air carried a strange, coarse grit, and the sand stirred higher and faster than usual. Kieran paused and observed carefully. This was no ordinary breeze. It was the early signs of a sandstorm, one that could overwhelm anyone unprepared. He adjusted his pack and checked his supplies. He had enough water to survive a day if needed, but survival in a storm required more than supplies. It required planning, strategy, and composure. Lyra finally stepped closer, her presence nearly silent. She observed him as he scanned the horizon. "The desert moves differently than humans expect," she said. "A storm can swallow a person in minutes. Most would run or panic." "What will you do?" Leaders barked commands to the younger ones, guiding them towards safer ground. Most humans would have tried to flee blindly, but Kieran understood patterns, signals, and behavior. He could use the herd, the terrain, and the storm itself to survive. Lyra watched him carefully. She had expected fear, but he remained composed. She began to see why he had survived so far. He did not react blindly. He analyzed, predicted, and adapted. This was not arrogance, it was mastery of his environment. The first gusts hit, sweeping sand across the dunes in violent swirls. Kieran moved quickly but deliberately, using rocks and terrain as shields. He kept the herd in sight, noting their movements, and identified a narrow canyon that offered shelter. He did not rush blindly into it. Instead, he approached from an angle that allowed him to stay hidden from predators and shielded from the strongest gusts. Lyra followed him silently, impressed. She could have led the herd through the storm easily, but she remained curious about this human's methods. Unlike most, he was not simply strong or fast. He was calculating, using knowledge and observation to survive where others might fail. As the storm intensified, Kieran reached the canyon entrance. The wind whipped violently, carrying sand that cut across his face like tiny knives. He crouched low and scanned the area, observing the smaller rocks and ledges. By using these as shields, he could move without exposing himself fully to the storm. He guided the herd toward the canyon, signaling with subtle gestures to maintain order. The animals, large and intelligent, responded to the patterns of movement rather than commands. Kieran understood them and adjusted carefully. Lyra's eyes widened. She had expected him to struggle or panic, but he moved with calm precision, guiding creatures much larger and stronger than himself without force, without dominance, just awareness and strategy. Hours passed and the storm grew worse. Visibility dropped to mere meters. The wind screamed, carrying sand that stung, blinded, and exhausted anyone unprepared. Kieran stayed low, moving slowly but deliberately, marking paths and guiding the herd to safer zones. Each decision mattered. A mistake could have led to injury or death. Lyra observed him silently, almost holding her breath. She had seen humans act in crises before, but none with such composure and calculated thought. He did not just survive. He controlled the chaos around him without showing fear or losing clarity. As they approached a narrow ledge within the canyon, a massive rock shifted under the storm's pressure, sending a small landslide toward the herd. Most humans would have panicked or hesitated. Kieran acted immediately, using his knowledge of physics and weight distribution to redirect the herd and minimize danger. His hands and body worked in perfect coordination, guiding the animals with subtle gestures and careful positioning. The herd responded, moving as he predicted. They avoided the landslide with minimal stress or injury. Lyra could not hide her astonishment. She had never seen a creature of his size and species interact so effectively with massive herd animals. He was not just surviving, he was commanding respect through intelligence and calm. The storm began to ease slightly, but the desert was still unforgiving. Kieran used the temporary lull to move the herd deeper into the canyon, where rocks provided natural windbreaks and temporary shelter. Lyra finally approached closer, walking beside him instead of observing from a distance. She wanted to see how he would handle the next challenge, to understand the human mind that survived where most failed. "You do not fear them," she said quietly, pointing to the herd now resting calmly. "Most would be overwhelmed by the size, strength, and unpredictability. You moved them with understanding." Kieran had done neither. He had survived, adapted, and even guided others to safety. The storm passed fully as night approached, leaving the desert cool and quiet. Kieran ensured the herd had sufficient water and rest. He set small markers in the sand to track movement and to anticipate future hazards. Every action was deliberate, careful, and efficient. Lyra stepped closer, breaking the silence. "You are unlike any human I have known," she said softly. "You survive where others fail, not by strength alone, but by mind, patience, and awareness. You are remarkable. The desert rewards those who respect it and themselves." The herd rested, and Kieran prepared his small camp. He had survived the storm, protected the herd, and maintained his resources. Lyra observed, her respect growing. She had seen warriors and strategists, but this human's mind worked in ways that were subtle, precise, and far-reaching. "You think like a warrior and a scholar at once," she said quietly, finally allowing herself to speak freely. "Most humans rely on weapons, brute force, or luck. You rely on understanding, patience, and adaptability. That is unusual." She had tested him, observed him, and challenged him. And he had survived, not through fear or aggression, but through intelligence, calm, and respect. Lyra realized that humans were more than she had imagined. They were clever, adaptable, and capable of survival in ways her clan had not fully understood. This one human had proven that intellect and composure could equal, or even surpass, strength, and tradition. As the desert night deepened, Kieran lay back against the rocks, resting yet alert. He had survived the storm, guided the herd, and preserved his resources. Every action had been deliberate, every decision calculated. He was not just a survivor, he was a master of his environment, using mind and observation to overcome challenges that might have destroyed others. Lyra watched him silently, understanding that this human had changed something in her perception. Humans were not weak or easily dismissed. They were intelligent, adaptable, and unpredictable, and she could not wait to see what he would do next. The desert stretched endlessly, quiet and vast, but Kieran's mind was active, analyzing, planning, and observing. He had survived a storm that would have crushed many, and he had done so not by force but by intellect, strategy, and calm confidence. And in that silent desert night, both human and alien understood something fundamental. Survival was not about fear, strength, or dominance. It was about thought, adaptation, and respect for one's environment. And Kieran, as always, had proven that humans were masters of survival in ways few could comprehend. Lyra finally spoke again, a note of admiration in her voice. "You are not just surviving, you are teaching, even without trying. Humans may be small and fragile, but your mind is dangerous." And impressive. Lyra stayed close, silent and thoughtful, realizing that this encounter had changed her understanding of humanity forever. The desert, harsh and unforgiving, had been conquered not by weapons or strength, but by intelligence, patience, and courage. And Kieran, ever aware, ever calm, had proven the power of the human mind. The desert morning arrived with a calm that seemed almost unnatural after the previous day's storm. Kieran rose before the sun, as always, his movements precise and deliberate. The desert stretched endlessly, a vast expanse of golden dunes and jagged rocks, but he moved confidently, as if the land itself were familiar territory. Lyra had been watching silently from a distance. Last night had changed something in her perception of him. This human was no ordinary traveler. He was clever, patient, and calm under pressure, qualities that the Verath valued but rarely saw in outsiders. Kieran approached the herd, which had grazed and rested near a narrow canyon through the night. The animals were surprisingly calm, despite the chaos of the storm. He studied their movements and behavior, understanding their needs and how they responded to signals. Lyra followed closely, now less cautious and more curious. She wanted to see what this human would do next. The desert was not finished with its challenges. A faint vibration reached Kieran's feet, a distant hum that carried across the sand. The herd stiffened. Kieran crouched, observing, noting the direction and rhythm of the disturbance. He recognized the signs immediately. A predator, larger and more dangerous than any he had faced so far, was approaching. Lyra tensed beside him. This was no ordinary desert predator. The Verath had legends of massive sand beasts that hunted in silence, their strength unmatched, their size overwhelming. Most humans would flee or panic. Kieran did neither. He observed, calculated, and prepared. The creature emerged from behind a ridge, massive and covered in coarse scales that reflected the morning sun. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its claws dug into the sand with a force that caused tremors. The herd grew restless, and Kieran understood that direct confrontation could lead to disaster. But he had a plan. He began to move deliberately, guiding the herd away from the predator while maintaining control over their movements. Lyra watched in silent awe as he coordinated the herd like a conductor with an orchestra, using subtle gestures and positioning to direct their paths. The predator lunged, but Kieran anticipated its movement, shifting the herd to safety at the last moment. The creature circled, trying to isolate a weak target. Kieran stayed calm, reading its behavior, predicting its moves. He grabbed a small shard of rock and threw it to the side, not to harm, but to redirect the predator's attention. It hesitated, confused by the unexpected distraction. Kieran moved the herd closer to a rocky outcrop that would block the predator's approach from certain angles. Lyra could not hide her astonishment. Most humans would have panicked, charged blindly, or hidden. Kieran used his mind instead of force, observation instead of weapons, and patience instead of recklessness. The predator growled, frustrated, unable to find an opening. Kieran continued guiding the herd, step by step, predicting every move the predator might make. He noticed a small canyon to the side, partially hidden and offering natural shelter. Using subtle signals, he led the herd toward it, ensuring that the largest and slowest animals remained protected. The predator tried one last attack, lunging toward the rear of the herd. Kieran remained calm, throwing a few more stones and creating shadows that confused the creature. It hesitated, then retreated, frustrated and defeated. The herd remained safe, their trust in him evident. Lyra stepped closer, her expression a mixture of respect and disbelief. "You do not fight it," she said. "You do not dominate it. You guide, you observe, and it obeys or flees. Humans are unusual. Knowledge, strategy, and calm can achieve more than aggression. Even a creature far stronger can be outmaneuvered by observation and planning." As the sun climbed higher, Kieran guided the herd toward a hidden water source he had discovered previously. The animals drank deeply, replenishing themselves, and Kieran observed carefully, ensuring no one overextended or panicked. Lyra remained silent, absorbing everything he did. After the herd had rested, Kieran turned to Lyra. "You see now," he said calmly, "humans survive by thinking, adapting, and respecting the world around them. Force alone cannot achieve it. It is mastery over oneself, over observation, and over understanding the environment. That is what allows humans to endure." Lyra walked beside him, no longer cautious but curious. She wanted to learn, to understand the human mind that had outmaneuvered both the desert and the predator. "Your kind is different," she said quietly. "I had been taught to underestimate humans, but you prove that intelligence and patience can equal strength and courage. The desert tests everyone, but it rewards those who understand, who observe, and who remain calm. You see the results, Lyra." The day continued, and Kieran guided the herd toward safer terrain, farther from predators and toward resources he had identified. He marked paths, noted dangers, and ensured the animals were safe. His mind worked continuously, analyzing, predicting, and adjusting. By evening, the desert had calmed, and Kieran allowed the herd to rest near a series of rock formations. He took a careful sip from his canteen, conserving water for the night. Lyra approached him directly this time, no hesitation in her movements. "You have changed my perception," she said, voice soft but firm. "Humans are clever, patient, and strong in ways we never fully understood. You do not fight for dominance. You think, you observe, and you survive. That is remarkable." She realized that he had survived not through weapons, speed, or brute force, but through intelligence and calm. His mind was a weapon, his patience a shield, and his observation a tool stronger than any blade. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the desert in deep gold and shadow. Kieran ensured the herd had sufficient water and rest before preparing his camp for the night. He marked the surrounding terrain subtly, ensuring that any movement of predators or threats could be monitored and avoided. Lyra sat nearby, silent but thoughtful. She had been a warrior her whole life, trained to survive in harsh conditions, yet this human had taught her a lesson without intending to. He had survived storms, predators, and scarcity through calm, intelligence, and strategy. "You walk alone, yet you are not weak," she said softly. "The clan would never expect such resilience from a single human. They will be stunned if they see this. That is what allows us to thrive. You survive, guide, and endure where most would perish. And you do it calmly, thoughtfully, without arrogance or fear. That is astonishing. That is the difference." Then she looked back at Kieran, admiration in her eyes. He had shown her that humans could endure, adapt, and thrive where others might fail. Finally, Kieran stood, ready to continue his journey. He had survived, guided the herd, and demonstrated humanity's resilience and ingenuity. He approached the edge of the canyon, taking a last look at the desert and the herd, then said calmly, "Suit yourself." It was calm, confident, and independent, a statement that humans survived on their own terms, not by fear, force, or dominance, but by intelligence, observation, and adaptability. The desert stretched endlessly before him, but Kieran walked forward with steady, deliberate steps. Lyra remained behind, her mind racing with admiration, respect, and curiosity. She realized that humans were more than clever, they were extraordinary. And as Kieran disappeared into the horizon, the Verath herd settled peacefully, and the desert seemed to acknowledge the quiet power of the human who had mastered its challenges. Kieran's actions had not only ensured survival, but had left a lasting impression, a lesson in patience, intelligence, and strength that would be remembered. For the first time, Lyra understood fully what it meant to face a human. They were unpredictable, resilient, and formidable in ways the desert itself could not break. And in that understanding, she saw the truth of humanity, clever, adaptable, and indomitable. The stars shone above, the desert silent and calm, and Kieran's journey continued. He had survived not by force but by mind, And that, above all, was humanity's greatest strength.